Welcome to another episode of Mind the Autism podcast. And I'm joined today with Matthew Lorange, who is, I've been following him for probably just over a year and participating in some of his live coaching events. Absolutely amazing human being. Obviously, I'm biased. He's going to be sharing with us. Matthew is a coach that primarily works with neurodivergent people, and we're going to be learning from him both his lived experience as well as some of the nuances that he's noticed in working with neurodivergent populations. So, Matt, uh, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself for our listeners?
Thanks for having me on, Stone, and thanks for that intro. I'm a autistic life coach working with other autistic people and other neurodivergent people as well. I also do consulting for organizations, companies, nonprofits, on making their places, right, more neuroaffirming for both the people who work there and for their customers or their public. Um, and it's fantastic work, and I get to talk about autism and neurodiversity and inclusion and diversity. And a big part of my work is organizing communities, right?
Hmm.
Organizing support groups and affirmation circles and online groups, offline groups, and actually also working with those who want to also become peer support workers or peer support coaches, peer support, whatever you want to call it, mentor, teacher, educator, and actually training them to go off and start their own communities, right? Because we need more support as autistic adults and as neurodivergent adults. We need more people out there advocating for all of us, right? Not all of us can be advocates or even want to be advocates. It's not only on us to advocate for ourselves, but if we can, that's awesome. And yeah, that's more or less in a nutshell what I do.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah,
I think you and I could probably talk for days about community because it's so necessary in within the autistic or neurodivergent ecosystem. So I get really excited whenever I hear that word. And just so there's a level of relatedness, can you share your autistic diagnostic experience? What happened? What led you to getting a diagnosis, and what did that open up for you?
sure. So I mean, I was diagnosed when I was 2.5 years old.
Okay.
So my diagnostic experience might be a little bit different than a lot of people, a lot of listeners, and outright because most adults today are diagnosed later in life, right, in their teens or even well into the oldest person I've met who was diagnosed, he was 78 when he got diagnosed. Um, so my journey is a bit different, but that doesn't mean that I began engaging with it right in the late 80s. Um, people who got diagnosed as kids back in the 80s and 90s, we weren't taught that being autistic was a good thing or even a neutral thing. We were taught that it was actually essentially a bad thing and kind of brought up to believe via teachers, families, not on purpose, right? But like of how it is as burdens, right? Because autism wasn't well understood. The quote unquote, and I'm making figure quotes for the listeners, treatments were basically not dog training for humans using
So kind of an
aversives and
ABA an ABA type
yeah,
model to get us to
yeah,
act like.
ABA and ABA type, right? And depending on the country, there's used different kind of modalities. But the type that I went through as a kid was ABA, which is applied behavioral analytics, which is essentially conversion therapy for autistic people. And
Teaching us
so
to mask.
teaching us to mask, teaching us to feel that we aren't okay, that we don't belong, that we need to do something in order to receive love, we need to do something in order to receive respect, etc. Um, not to say that only young autistic people learn to mask, right? I always say that everybody's kind of gone through ABA. If you're late diagnosed, you've got it from society and family and school and colleagues. And if you're diagnosed as a kid, you went through ABA, you got all of that, plus your parents pay somebody to do it to you. But I mean, it's all, we're not playing, Olympics of who's got the worst, masking, right? I joke, people go, I am a higher masker than you. I go, this is not something we want to dunk on people, right? Like, it's not, I don't quite understand that conversation. But so you don't learn these things. It wasn't until I was in college, in the early 2000s, that I understood that being autistic didn't mean that I was essentially and inherently broken and deformed in my brain, which is that's the kind of term that I used to think of, like deformed in my brain. My brain is deformed, and therefore this is why I'm like this, and I need to try harder to be normal like everybody else. That was how I lived my first 18 years in the world. And in my first year of university, I have what we call today autistic burnout, right? That term didn't exist during the George W. Bush years. Or at least it didn't exist in anywhere where I was, not at my university. And, I remember going to the health center, and I thought I was depressed. Like, I didn't know what it was. And they asked, have you ever been assessed for autism before? I go, oh, yeah. I was diagnosed as a kid, but, like, I went to therapy, and, like, I'm good. Like, it's not a major part of my life. Like, I know that you don't ever get it cured. I know that you don't ever grow out of it, but, like, I've overcome it, and it's really not an issue for me. And I remember the guy just looking at me like, you poor thing. And that began a journey of, connecting with other autistic students and learning about those were the kind of I'm not going to say the earliest days of the neurodiversity movement. That was more from like the mid 90s, but still relatively in the first decade, right? Of people talking and chatting on blogs, which were just becoming a thing. Autistic people were starting to think, maybe there's this thing, neurodiversity. All brains are different. That's cool. This is just a normal human experience. And I'm not going to tell you that I bought into everything then like I do now, but it was the beginning of a journey, and that's a journey that's been going on for nearly 20 years at this point. Or 20 years at this point.
Yes.
Yeah, I forget that time flies, and I can't say nearly 20 years after we've passed the 20-year mark. But and it's been a journey since then, right? Of learning more and connecting. And already back then in university, I got involved in mentoring other students. So I recovered from my burnout. I went through college. I graduated. I had a great time. I made friends. So there I started mentoring other autistic students coming in. And I've never really stopped. And I've been working with autistic people ever since.
So what that brings up an interesting question, because I speak with a lot of newly diagnosed autistic people who are adults, and there's usually a range between shock and disbelief and not wanting to accept it, and the opposite end, which is they're so relieved that they can finally let their hair down and be exactly who they are. What was the catalyst for you where you decided, I want to make a difference to my community? This is going to be my life. What is it that was it more of a journey for you, or did something happen where you said everything is lining up? This is going to be what I do.
So, I started doing this kind of work, on a volunteer basis, of course, in university, and went on to build a career in a number of industries, and always was doing my mentor kind of work, is what I called it then. I had a few hours a month where I was part of local autistic organization, just to mentor younger people or mentor other autistic entrepreneurs who wanted to better their lives, start their own thing, needed practical advice. I think that every group needs to have somebody who they see succeeding, right? Not to say that I'm a role model for everybody or anything, but on a much smaller scale. I'm not even talking about role models. An
Mm,
autistic person living in a small city, doesn't love their job, wants to start their own small business, needs a little bit of needs some help to do it. They don't know what they don't even do. Really helpful to then see another person doing the same thing, right? Who can advise and help grow and talk and bounce ideas off of. And that's how I started it. And
mm,
I did that for a good 15 years. And that grew, and sometimes I would do more groups, or I would speak to a group about these kind of things. And I also organized a few what I call affirmation circles. Cause I was looking for my own support also, and I wanted to have groups of people where we could sit and talk about things. And eventually, all these things that I kind of was internalizing over the years kind of came to a head. And I understood that the place I was happiest, where I was feeling the most fulfilled, was working in the community. Like
mm,
that was, I'm always hesitant to use words like calling because it wasn't my calling. Actually, when I went to
mm.
university, I wanted to be a rabbi. That was what I went to university for and thought I was going to do. And but it's a vocation. It's something that I do feel it's meaningful work. And
Yeah. It
and for
sounds
me,
to me
it's
that,
meaningful for the community, but also just even for me, it's meaningful to be able to help.
yeah. Well, that's in alignment with being a rabbi, I would imagine. But
Yeah,
what I'm hearing in the way that you're sharing is that there wasn't a theoretical framework. Yours was all experiential. And so you
yeah,
tried different things. You worked one-on-one, you did group, but you were always in this space of being a contribution. And
yeah,
so as you're going on this journey of contribution, you noticed, wow, here are the areas where I'm most fulfilled. And that seems to have been what started you on that purposeful journey. And the reason why that's so beautiful that you elicited that or shared that unfolding for yourself is we both have a lot of clients who will say, well, I don't know what my passion is. I don't know what my purpose is. I don't know how to do da, 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 da. And they're looking for the one thing when it's not the one thing. It's who you're being in your life. And those experiences can give us clues as to a direction that we may want to try.
yeah. One of the big reasons I think that we go into burnout is that there's a mismatch, not just between our needs and reality, but our values and reality. And
Mm,
people often think that their values and their needs, like that values are kind of a preference and not a need. They think that living in life with your passion is a preference, not a need. And that's really convenient to tell to disabled people who have been kind of put down under the boot for their whole lives. But we actually need to live in line with those passions. We need to be able to really learn how to even tap into them. Because when we can live in line with our passions, with our values, this is kind of the key to regulation, I think, which is kind of the big goal that we have here.
mm.
And that's what I
And
really
we
try to do in
can't
my work.
regulate unless we are part of a resourceful and nurturing community.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the best way, when I started doing groups, I thought it was going to be a way just like people to get together and talk and chat. I understand that actually it's a much bigger value in that, right? Like being part of the community helps you regulate, but it also helps you learn more about yourself. As you learn more about yourself, you're contributing that to the community. Somebody else who might not have the language for what they're feeling, doesn't know how to relate to it, hears the voice of somebody else in that group and goes, "Oh my God, yes, that is how I feel. I never had the language that helps others," and then that goes in. Just so you know how like my in
Yes.
breath is your out breath and vice versa. Same thing with our
Yes.
experiences and understanding
Yes.
and helping to get clarity on ourselves.
I just want to pause right there, and I want to plug your groups. Uh, man, they are sensational, and I don't obviously I've been to a lot of networking groups. I've participated in a lot of different things. Yours are so incredibly effective. If anyone is looking for a group where they can connect with other autistic people who are engaged with their lives and they're wanting to make a difference, it's important that you go to theautisticcoach.com. Go through there and look at some of the options for the different group coaching options that are available. Obviously, that's been my experience. I'm biased. I think you're amazing, and how you contribute to the planet is both amazing and essential, because your service uh, offers that bit that we need when we look at blue zone attributes. Your service offers an opportunity for people to feel necessary and having purposeful meaning with their identity, and it gives them an opportunity to experience community. Even my first time participating in one of your events, I noticed that there was an almost immediate rapport and connection with the other people in the group, even though we were all over the world and so very different from one another. But we all had this shared spectrum.
What I find amazing about the different communities I'm a part of is that there's very, very few places where you can get a group of people together who come from different countries, different cultural backgrounds, different racial backgrounds, different religious backgrounds. Like people that you would say, these people can't sit in a room together. That's not going to work. People are going to argue about politics. They're going to argue about religion. They're going to argue about what language we should be speaking. They're not going to relate to one another. Not to say that it always is, butterflies and rainbows, and that there's never people who, that everybody relates to everybody and everything's a big perfect utopia. No. But what I found in these autistic spaces is that people are able to connect in ways where they would never be able to connect in another space, because they're coming from, and autism presents different in different cultures and different national contexts, different religious contexts, different gender contexts, different sexuality contexts. But there is always this underlying something which I don't know how to put a word to. But when you put a bunch of autistic people in a room together, a bunch of magic happens, right? And I know that might sound corny, and people who might be listening might think, what are these guys on about? I don't know. But I saw it. It inspired me, and I've never looked back, and it's all I do, and it's all I can think about.
Mm.
I spend nearly 7 days a week organizing these kind of communities, because I think that it's beyond that. I think it's important for me personally, as an autistic person who also is participating. It's huge.
You're highly effective at creating spaces where people can just fall right into this deep rapport. It reminds me of the way children, when they first meet one another, they have this automatic thing where they want to get together, and even if they don't have, I'm thinking of toddlers, even when they don't have language, they automatically want to play together, and they learn how to communicate their preferences through play. And it's not an exact analogy, but that's the experience that I have when I'm collaborating with other autistic people. There isn't this friction to say, oh no, I'm different. It's more, hey, what are you into? And we want to celebrate one another.
Yeah, absolutely. And I
So
mean, it's a form of adult play. I think that you said it beautifully, that we kids, they go around play. Like, I see what the kind of work that we're doing is a form of play. right? It's
Mm.
getting together, throwing ideas around, talking about things, relating and joking and crying sometimes, right?
I know that you probably get a lot of fulfillment in different areas of your vocation. Is there a favorite way that you enjoy contributing, and why would that be?
My favorite way of contributing, I would say, is through grounding practices. I love getting together. Most autistic people, depending on the studies that you look at, anywhere between 85 to 90% of autistic people deal with something called alexithymia, which is an inability to place emotions in the body, to express emotions. A lot of us also deal with interoception issues, feeling bodily sensations, whether it's going to the bathroom, tiredness, dehydration, hunger. And I love being able to use grounding and somatic mindfulness practices to not just be present in the space, but to also get in touch with ourselves, right? I feel like, so in Jewish mysticism, we speak about there being like four kind of levels of the soul. There's an embodied part, there's an intellectual part, there's an emotional part, and there's this like kind of out of your body part, right? And a lot of people are really connected to that embodied part, and they think about their bodies, and they feel their bodies, they know when something's wrong with their body, and they have an intuitive connection with their body. Most autistic people do. The vast majority do. Then you have those who are super connected to their emotions, but not necessarily to those other three faculties, right? And they're really emotional, they're connected to their emotions, they're passionate, but they also don't have great, connection to their body. They don't have a lot of connection to their intellect, right? They're just controlled by their heart. And also they don't have that outer thing. There's people who live above all of those, right? And they're not connected to their body, their intellect, or their emotions. And they're just kind of living on another world, right? Which on the one hand is super cool, but also some of us have to live in the world. And I find that
Mm.
autistic people most often, not exclusively, of course, we're all different, but exclusively we live in the mind. And our minds are never stopping, right? I think that's one of the most common things I hear from us. Our minds never stop. We're living in our mind. We intellectualize our emotions very often. We intellectualize our physical sensations. And so we're missing out on these other elements. And so what I love doing is these kind of exercises where we can really get into our bodies, where we can get
Yeah.
into our emotions, where we can then step out and be able to take together. Because like with our intellect, we can figure out a bunch of our needs, right? Like being autistic means
Mm.
figuring out what your needs are, what you're going to regulate your nervous system. That's the ultimate goal, right? And we're very good at intellectualizing and thinking about our needs. But a lot of those needs we can't figure out by intellect. We need to figure out via our emotions or via
Yes.
our bodies. And it's hard to do that when your whole life you've been told not to listen to your body, not to respect your body, that your emotions are irrelevant, that you're too much, that you're too little, that your emotions are
Mm.
wrong, and to stop that, and to stop talking, and to be quiet and be small. To make sense that we're in our head, it's the only safe place we have.
And when you look at the research that suggests that autistic people experience their emotions 40% more than neurotypical people, that is a lot for us to
Yeah,
be containing and not addressing.
yeah.
I
Because
was
we
I
actually
was
are
laughing.
feeling it more, but we're able to express it and connect to it less. It's like this cruel irony.
Yes, yes, yes. I was laughing earlier because I was thinking how sometimes I'll be interacting with someone and I am thinking the thought, and in some alternate universe, I believe that I have communicated that thought, but I haven't said anything. And so I'm almost interacting with someone as if they were present to the way I was thinking, and they're not connected. Why-
Voilà.
I always found that odd that I do that. I'll be in a conversation with someone and say, "Oh yeah, I told you such and such," and they said, "No, you didn't." I said, "Oh, that's right. I was just thinking it. I thought you had access to that."
And then we often get frustrated. Like we're like, "What do you mean I understand what I'm thinking and what I'm saying?" It's like it makes total sense to me. I've thought out every map in my head, but all that came out was, "I think we should do this." It's like, well, why? You go, what do you mean why? You start going crazy.
Yeah. So I love what you're saying about grounding. That is so important and necessary. And I don't know too many. Yeah, actually, you're the first person that I've spoken with that talks about it in the way that frames it in the way that you do. So this is beautiful.
And I prefer
What?
to look at it as grounding instead of meditation. People, often
Mm,
associate meditation with whatever, right? And they'll connect to it, or it's not for me, and it's not for everybody.
yeah,
But that's why I like to look at
and
it as
a
grounding,
lot
as
of autistic
strategies for connecting to ourselves.
and a lot of autistic people don't, at least based on my experience, they don't like the word meditation.
Yeah.
They don't want to deal with that because it's too fluffy or
Well, most meditation that's also out there is super neurotypically based, right? Just like,
mm,
okay, sit down, breathe. All your tension is gone. Breathe. Your trauma has been released. Namaste.
yeah,
Right? It's like, well, bro, like I'm still tense. Like, so what are you on about?
yeah. So we're almost at time, and I ask this question of everyone who comes on. If you had a magic wand and you could cultivate autistic community where there's deep purposeful connection, what are some of the things that you would focus on?
I would like to have a community where people can live together, right? Like my big dream, right, is having a place where, what do you want to call it?
An autistic state,
I don't know.
physical
I
location.
don't even know of a state, but a place where people can go live, right? Let's call it let's start with an autistic condo, okay? An
Yeah, yeah,
autistic
yeah.
village, right?
Yes.
Where the things are built already in a state that is sensory affirming, that the
Mm,
windows are the way it is, that the houses are built in a certain way, that the angles of things are in a certain way, that the smells, like already from a sensory place, right? Because we
yes.
get regulated, dysregulated by our physiological, our sensory, and our emotional. So I want to find a place where physiologically we're breathing good air, where
Mm,
where the heat is the right amount, where it's not too hot, not too cold, like Goldilocks, right? Where the sensory, the buildings are designed, right? So much of our modern day design, right, is just
yes.
not autistic friendly, where everything
Yeah.
is done autistic friendly. And where people, like I don't actually even have like some like grand social plan for this village, which is like a bunch of autistic people creating a community where we respect each other's needs, right?
Mm,
And you might say, well, everybody has different needs, and that's absolutely true, right? And when people come to groups and to our spaces, right, people have different needs. Let's talk about them. And there's always going to be an accommodation. Sometimes two people's needs aren't going to meet. Okay, they're going to go live on the other side of the village, right?
mm,
And that's okay. Just like in a group space, what my camera might be disorienting you, your camera might be disorienting me. So we figure out a solution that, we point the cameras in a certain area, that we don't look at each other necessarily now we're talking. There's always going to be kind of solutions that we can find. And
mm.
I think it ultimately comes, like people, I did an interview earlier today where I was asked, what would you tell a parent who just, their child just got diagnosed autistic? And I didn't speak about not going to ABA, though they shouldn't, right? I did mention that after. But I think the most important thing is that your child grows up in an environment and in a home where they are taught that they are not broken, that they are perfect, and that their needs are different than some other else's needs. Every human being's needs are different. So for
Mm,
me now, you ask me what the magic one, that community would be a community where people respect the fact that we have different needs and we respect them. Because so much of our
mm.
anxiety, so much of our angst in living in a neurotypical world is because our needs are not only not being met, they're also being denied that they exist to begin with, and they're not
That's
understood.
right.
So even just
That's
having
right.
a bunch of people who understand each other, that's already huge.
Mm. And just to follow on from what you're sharing, so you shared the physiological factors. Are there any cultural factors that you would suggest? And I'm hearing in the values that part of our values would be, or part of our culture would be acceptance
Yeah.
and listening.
Yeah.
What else comes up for you?
Recognizing that everybody who's there has come from a different place. And certain people have had more space given to them in life, and others have had less space. And
Mm,
recognizing that here, everybody has space. Everyone's allowed to take up space.
mm.
everybody can have a voice here, and be recognizing also the fact that we come from a place where not everybody did have space before. Still obviously recognizing that, and being known that you are welcome, that you are
Mm,
loved,
that's
and that
right.
you are not broken, you are not inherently or morally corrupt, that you are perfect the way you are, and you have needs and emotional, sensory, physiological, and those are okay. And you're going to be supported.
Say amen. Yeah, amen to that.
Amen.
So before I invite you to share the final word, I just want to share with our listeners about our next episode. You don't want to miss it because we will be having a conversation with an ex Mossad retired agent who has worked with the IDF with a program that trains autistic people in a sensory friendly environment so that they are able to join the Israeli Defense Force and be of service and contribution to their community and to the nation. It has broad reaching implications. It's a model that can be replicated perspective the way it's being done in Israel, but it has a framework that can be implemented globally. You absolutely do not want to miss this episode, which will be probably posting within the next 7 days or so. So I just wanted to get everyone excited about that conversation. And with that, Matt, your final word.
Guess what I want to share as my final word is that you, listener, might be new on this journey, whether you were diagnosed yesterday or 20 years ago or 30 years ago, might be new on this journey of self acceptance and understanding yourself. And it's absolutely essential to remember that you are not broken. You are not deformed in your head. Yes, we are disabled as being autistic people living in a world that's not built for us. That does not mean that you are less. It does not mean that anything is limited to you. And that the world doesn't need to be so scary. It is scary because this world is not built for us. But we can live in this world and even thrive while still honoring ourselves and loving ourselves. And that I know that it sounds impossible, and I know that it sounds wild beyond all of our imaginations, but it is possible.
Thank you so much. Beautifully articulated. Matt, where I know I mentioned it earlier, but just so everyone can hear it from you, what's the best place for people to go to when they're ready to engage your services?
Yeah. Whether it's my services, right? So I offer paid services of coaching and workshops and seminars. And I also offer anywhere between 15 to 20 absolutely free support and affirmation circles every month. And you can find all of that information at theautisticcoach.com. And that's where you can find me.
Fantastic, fantastic. All of that will be in the show notes, so don't feel like you have to keep rewinding and listening. Just go down into the comments and you'll be able to get a direct link there. Matthew, I want to thank you so much for your generous attention and your contribution. You're in Paris. It's after midnight there. I'm here on the Gold Coast in Australia. It's only 10 a.m. here. Again, thank you, thank you, thank you. I appreciate you. I appreciate your contribution so much. And I look forward to speaking with you on our next episode, which I'm hoping we'll be able to discuss community in depth.
Great. Thank you so much, Tom.
Sure. Okay. Bye bye.